Hi everyone, welcome to today's session of the IT Uninterrupted series. The title is Rethinking the RFP. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. For example, this session will be available on demand and so will the slides as well. If you have any specific questions, you can use the GoToWebinar platform and click the tab under questions and we'll make sure to get an answer to you as soon as possible. So let's get started. My name is Andy Fernandez and I'll be your speaker today. I'm a product marketing manager here at Zerto. My focus in my career has exclusively been within the data center, focused on backup technologies, disaster recovery, and cloud as well. Today's agenda, we're going to do a quick introduction, go over what COVID-19 has done specifically to businesses and what are the IT challenges behind them, how this impacts RFPs and the impact of Agile Procurement, and also looking at, from a product perspective, what are some of the key platform considerations that businesses have to make. And we'll conclude with a quick summary of how Zerto can help deliver a lot of these specific requirements in today's market. As we all know, and as we all have been bombarded with information, COVID-19 has completely changed the way we do business, the way that we interact, and the way that we expect the world to continue. And what Gartner has done is provided a lot of guidance essentially on what this means from a business perspective and what it actually means for IT organizations as well. Now, if you think about this graph, it shows you the activity and the time. And at the beginning, every organization was focused on exclusively how do I quickly respond to these challenges, how do I adapt, and how do I make sure that we can continue doing business. After that, at different paces and at different times, depending on the company, there's the recovery phase of, okay, we've been through the brunt of it, how do we make sure that we not only recover from a revenue perspective, but make sure that we're there with all of the requirements that we have. And then ultimately, it's the renew phase. And this organizations have also been through all at different stages with this, but it's really about how do I adapt for the new world that COVID-19 has forced us on? How do I adapt my business model, the tools that I have, the processes and the operations, and how do I make sure that my organization is resilient? But if we specifically look at this from an IT perspective or for infrastructure and operations, let's take a look at what that looks like. Now, from our perspective, when we look at the response, right, and when we're talking exclusively within the IT organization, the response looks like this. How do I manage the immediate surge of both remote work and demands? I cut the costs and reduce unplanned downtime. How do we stop the bleeding, make sure that we give all of our employees the resources, the tools, and the availability they need to be productive? And then on the second phase, it's how do I meet new digital demands for customers and employees, but also mitigate a lot of the risks, specifically around cybersecurity. And then the third is really around your infrastructure and making sure that your infrastructure supports your business plans of the future. And that is accelerating cloud adoption and facilitating new digital business models. Now, here's some of the data that's backing a lot of these assumptions. Ever since COVID-19 began and people went into full quarantine, we saw the share of employees working remotely full-time. Look at the percentage here across both information services, professional services, financial activities, and even manufacturing and education. Now, some of these jobs will go back to being office-based jobs or location-based jobs, but we know that a lot of these organizations are now going to realize the benefits, and so are the employees realizing the benefits of remote work. So it's critical that we are able, as IT organizations, to support those changes. But it's not just internally, and it's not just about remote work. It's also about being able to support digital services. This is another one by McKinsey as well, where they were showing the digital adoption by industry, everything from banking, entertainment, groceries, apparel, retail, and whatnot. Now, what we're seeing is that the demand was clear for digital-only services during the worst of COVID-19. But that behavior stayed, and organizations are looking and demanding to be able to deliver digital services as well. So this has placed a significant demand on IT. But what does it actually mean for IT, right? When we know that remote work is most likely here to stay. Digital first interactions are also most likely here to stay. So let's take a look at what that means for businesses in IT. Based on these assumptions and based on the data that we're seeing, there's a few key imperatives here for organizations that are looking to renew and are looking to thrive in this post-COVID or in the future post-COVID world. The first one is being able to accelerate application development. We talked about organizations needing to support new digital deliveries, new digital services. You can't do that without being able to have the development force to support that. Organizations also need to have the flexibility of their infrastructure to be able to scale appropriately, to be able to know that they have availability at all times, regardless of their location and regardless of what type of on-premises or cloud infrastructure they're using. But they have to do all this while reducing costs and resources, right? We're looking at potential issues, right, from a financial perspective, not just directly in the short term with budget hits, but also just future earning potential as well. So organizations need to look at, how do I actually reduce the cost, resources, the time that's spent on reactive activities as well. And downtime is still a critical aspect. How do you reduce downtime and reduce data loss so that your organization can deliver a seamless experience, not only to its employees, but to its customers as well? And ultimately, you have to do this from a secure perspective, being a cyber resilient organization that can mitigate this risk and stay afloat during these times, especially when we're all vulnerable as organizations as well. We've seen what the impact has been on businesses and the decisions that IT has to make, but we're also seeing this impact on the evolution of our data centers, especially our enterprise data centers, right? If you think about the past, they were really focused on physical on-premises site. And that includes your primary data center site and then also a secondary site that was used for DR and recovery purposes. These were complex sites that required a lot of staff, a lot of time, and manual processes. There was a tier level design. They were large and inefficient and really slow to adapt just because of the capital expenditures required to be able to refresh these as well. Now, if you think about the expectations, not only now, but for the future, it's around having distributed and hybrid IT, that it's simple, that it's standardized, and that it's rationalized. Specifically, that it's software defined and that it's always on, and that it's efficient. So you don't have to spend as much time, as much staff, as much resources on maintaining your sites as well. And that it's agile and easy to move, easy to scale. And that's really where it's reflecting, right? So what this means is, as organizations, we have to support new business models. We have to make sure that our data centers can deliver and power those needs. Now, that's where the topic of RFP comes in, right? We think about our previous approach, right, even since the 80s, of how do we actually send requests for information and requests for product on these, and we have to really rethink that approach, right, because the RFP has been antiquated, and so it's something to really think about. And that's where we get into this, right? Talking about the evolution of the RFP, the RFI, and then moving into something called Agile Procurement and why it's important to be able to take a look at that. Now, RFPs aren't always a bad thing. They've been very useful for a very long time, and they do have a purpose. But there is a lot of flack online, and when you think about organizations, not only on the response side of the RFP, but those who are actually asking for an RFP as well. And why is that? Why are there so many challenges, especially in today's age with the expectations that we have for IT and the speed to market that we have? Why are RFPs so challenging? Well, it starts off with the fact that RFPs are exclusively feature focused. They're not an optimal solution to be able to find a strategic partner. They take quite some time, and it's a timely, tedious process with multiple touch points. And it really supports a waterfall strategy. It does not work in an agile organization that needs to be quickly moving and prototyping versus waiting months in time for the proper RFP process to continue. Also, organizations and IT, there's continuous evolving requirements. And those requirements from an RFP don't really revolve quickly, especially because they're being touched by so many members internally and externally as well. And ultimately, a lot of RFPs are influenced by the vendors that are trying to sell that to them. So they really don't have an unbiased approach into what are the problems that we're actually solving, what are the outcomes that we want, and what can a product do to help us fulfill that. So that's where something like Agile Procurement comes into play, and it's very efficient. And what is it? Well, Agile Procurement is a way of purchasing solutions according to the outcomes that you seek rather than the product specification. Now, based on your experience as an organization, when is it appropriate to adopt this type of model? Well, it's when the traditional approach of an RFP has failed, when you need something completely innovative, when you don't know the requirements and you know that they're evolving. And when time precludes a traditional approach, when you need something now, the RFP process is not going to help you. Gartner has delivered a very interesting approach to Agile Procurement, specifically within 4 stages. Stage 1 being what we call the epic. And within the epic, you really have to take a first principles approach to understand what exactly am I trying to solve here? What are my barriers? How am I going to measure success? And what are those objectives? After you've understood what that storyboard looks like, you move on to your due diligence, where you understand exactly the oversight required, what do you need from a regulatory perspective, from a policy perspective, and then legal as well. After that, you move into the 3rd stage of the vendor evidence. This is where the proof of concepts come in, the reference checks, looking at case studies, and even the technical vendor documentation as well. And after that, you enter what they call stage 4, which is the usual contract negotiation. And in this approach, you have to do all of your due diligence and get your legal team involved and make sure that you're getting the best possible deal for the solution, the platform that you're looking at. So now that we've looked at this approach that Gartner has defined under Agile Procurement, let's go over to really make sure we know what our needs are when it comes to backup, disaster recovery, and cloud mobility, and what IT infrastructure organizations need to look at and understand and evaluate before they move forward with any other solution. And now that we've looked at the phases or the stages of Agile Procurement and what level of expectations have to be created, especially when we talk about storyboarding and understanding exactly what expectations need to be fulfilled, it's important to also look at how IT, specifically infrastructure organizations, has evolved when we think about backup technology, disaster recovery, and cloud mobility. And there's really 3 key requirements that we have to rethink, and therefore rethink our approach to RFPs or even Agile Procurement when it comes to these 3 specific subsets of I&O. So when we look at the requirements, right, for things like backup, disaster, and disaster recovery, these are things that have been around for decades. And we've seen incremental innovation at each level, and that also includes cloud mobility. But ultimately, it's been the same technology that has been improved, and that has also reflected on our RFP expectations. But we really have to take a look at how these industries are evolving, how these solutions are evolving, and what we need to understand in order to make sure that we are accurately representing what outcomes we want from these technologies. And those 3 categories are downtime and data loss, siloed solutions, and infrastructure flexibility. Those are 3 key things, right? We're looking at the first one, and that's around downtime and data loss. What does that mean? Well, if you think about what's going on in today's world, one of the key indicators or key leaders of unplanned downtime are cyber attacks, specifically around ransomware. Last year in 2019, we sponsored a State of IT Resilience survey done by IDC, and we found some very interesting results there. One of them being that 84% of those organizations who were surveyed experienced a malicious attack in the past 12 months. 89% of which were successfully attacked, and 93% of those resulted in data corruption or loss. We are seeing that these attacks are successful. Companies continue falling victim to these. We have to make sure that your organization is resilient. Your organization has the proper backup and DR technology to be able to recover in a decent amount of time as well. But now that we've looked at one of the sources of unplanned downtime and its consequences, let's take a look at how availability expectations themselves has also evolved. If you think historically around backup and DR and our expectations for organizations running and having downtime, in the past, most organizations had a few critical applications. They had a 9 to 5 interaction with customers, especially a lot of it being physical, and the business could technically run on paper. So there was a expected amount of downtime, and there was a tolerance for both planned and unplanned downtime. But even before COVID-19, we lived in a world where 24/7 availability was the expectation. Businesses relied on it. The disruption of just 1 hour to major enterprises could cost millions of dollars, not only just from a quantifiable financial loss perspective, but also from a market expectation and what the brand identity was too. So if we think about that now, not only in today's digital era, but also within COVID, all applications are important. Customers expect a 24/7 experience, and the applications are a critical part of the business. Image is everything. We know how fickle users can be once they realize that an organization has had downtime in the past and they can't really rely on it. So we have to make sure that as organizations, we continue to make sure that our expectations for SLAs or even recovery time objectives and recovery point objectives are in line with the expectations of the market. And on that note, that's what we've seen. We've seen performance requirements that have evolved. The top tier applications are with expected RPOs of seconds and RTOs of minutes. And that actually goes to the medium tier applications as well. And even your lower tier applications, those that are simply just backed up, have RPOs of hours to days and RTOs of days. So we're seeing that SLA requirements are changing rapidly. Now the question is, do we have the actual technology to meet these demands, not just for your most critical applications, but for all workloads in your environment? Now that we've seen what performance requirements look like today, it's very important to take a look at why legacy backup simply isn't cutting it, and it cannot deliver the downtime and the data loss expectations that organizations have today. First and foremost, it's simply because of the nature of snapshots. When you perform an entire copy of your environment or of your workloads that you are designated, you have a massive impact on production. This is why organizations have to take periodic backups. Usually that happens on a nightly period during off-work hours. So relying on daily backups already positions a severe issue when it comes to data loss. But then you have the impact of appliances having and requiring lots of hardware. And that hardware comes with a lot of time, a lot of resources, and a lot of hidden costs as well. And usually when you think about legacy backup, you also have to recover on or from secondary storage, and it also requires a move to production. Because of its nature, because backup is only incrementally improved for the last few decades, it's showing that this approach is simply not good enough when it comes to evaluating future data protection or future backup needs. So now that we've looked at a lot of the challenges of legacy backup and its architecture and what the constraints are on availability, let's also look at what siloed solutions do to an organization and what the future of a converged platform for all three functions of backup, disaster recovery, and cloud mobility look like. If you think about the state of disaster recovery and backup and cloud mobility or hybrid cloud solutions today, they're all completely siloed, meaning that each of them requires a solution or even a set of tools for each one with its own staff and own organization, best practices that are completely separated. So this leads to a lot of inefficiency. But something that we're seeing in the marketplace is the fact that organizations are moving towards converging these three. Now, some are approaching it via backup and then trying to solve for DR use cases and also for cloud mobility use cases. But then others are seeing the value of replication and then trying to solve for backup use cases with replication as well. But that's what shows the IT resilience model, which is being able to converge both disaster recovery replication, backup, and hybrid cloud into one single simple tool or platform that allows you to address all recovery scenarios. Now, what do I mean by all recovery scenarios? Well, businesses and organizations need to manage all disruptions, whether it's a hurricane or a specific natural disaster, a ransomware attack, or even day-to-day recovery scenarios like file corruptions and things like that, or even something that's a bit more proactive like moving to the cloud or modernizing your infrastructure, or even completely being able to consolidate your data centers as well. These are all important things that fall under disaster recovery, under backup, and under workload mobility. So you need a solution that allows you to solve for all of these. So, when you think about the traditional process, having all these siloed solutions, these usually require different RFPs and different RFIs with completely different speeds and feeds and outcomes that aren't really conducive to a converged model. So when you think about your next platform, when you think about the moves that your organization has to make to keep the lights on, to make sure that you can deliver the reduced downtime, the reduced data loss that your organization needs to remain competitive, then you have to look at what platform, what solution can I utilize that can fulfill all of these outcomes, not just the speeds and feeds that I need, but the actual outcomes that my organization recovers. So when you look at that, always look at what can I do for my unplanned downtime, right? Like your reactive scenarios where you have to recover data or an entire site, but also for your planned downtime, for decisions that are actually conducive to growth in the business and accelerate digital transformation. And that's what's so important. Now, within that, I want to transition to be able to talk about how Zerto can help us do that, or can help your organization do that. And before we move into how Zerto can help deliver that, there's one more critical aspect when it comes to thinking about your organization and what the future of your RFPs and your Agile procurement look like when it comes to your infrastructure, and that's around infrastructure flexibility. As you know, as you need to scale your resources, as you need to diversify and have a hybrid model or even a multi-cloud model, you need the ability to protect, to recover your data from on-premises and clouds at all time and not be stifled or stuck with one specific vendor. You need the freedom to be able to achieve that with whatever solution or platform that you have, that it's software only, and that it's agnostic towards any vendor, both on premises and in the cloud. That's a crucial component and a crucial requirement and desired outcome that should also be reflected within the Agile procurement or RFP process as well. So now let's move on to the Zerto vision, to who we are as an organization and how we can help you do that. So now that we've looked at the challenges that we face today, the imperatives that IT organizations face, and some of the best practices and things to think about when it comes to the RFP and the Agile procurement process for backup, for DR, and for cloud mobility, let's take a look at quickly how Zerto can help with that. First of all, our vision at Zerto is to enable an uninterrupted world for all technology users, consumers, and businesses. We were established in 2009. We have over 8,000 customers in 75 countries and over 1,500 partners and strategic alliances including Microsoft, HPE, IBM, and over 450 global service providers. Now, what is it that we do? Well, at Zerto, we converge cloud mobility, disaster recovery, and backup solutions into a single, simple, scalable IT resilience platform. When we think about what the Zerto difference is, the difference of the IT resilience platform from any backup, any disaster recovery, any cloud mobility competitor, it's around these four key items. The first one being continuous replication. Zerto's unique near synchronous replication approach at the hypervisor level positions it in a way to deliver some of the industry's best RPOs. But when it comes to an RTO, the Zerto journal recovery method is extremely innovative and does provide a very effective way to simply and granularly recover your mission critical data. And then there's also the application consistency perspective. Being able to treat applications as a cohesive unit is a massive differentiator for Zerto as well. And ultimately, being able to perform all of these recovery scenarios and these operations, to do it in a simple way, in a way that's automated with built-in orchestration and complete visibility. And to get started, one of the most important things about Zerto is its replication. And we've already talked about it being near synchronous, about it living at the hypervisor level. And what this does is essentially allows its replication to create checkpoints every 5 seconds. Except these checkpoints have no impact on your production environment, and they're not snapshots, they're not copies that place a massive strain on both your production environment, but also require a lot of storage. Now, Zerto's replication is software only. It's a simple deployment. You can literally install it in minutes. There's no production impact, as we've stated. There's no scheduling, snapshots, any additional agents that need to be installed. And most importantly as well, it's hardware and storage agnostic. So regardless of your infrastructure, regardless of whether it's exclusively on-premise or in the cloud, you're always protected with Zerto's replication. And when we talk about journal-based recovery, this is an excellent method in how to describe it, right? For example, we know that Zerto, you can create checkpoints every 5 seconds. Now, ultimately, a really good example to use is ransomware. Let's say that as an organization, you get hit by ransomware at this specific point in time. With traditional backup, you rely on daily backups for most of the time. So if you're hit at a specific point in time, your data is encrypted, you have to rely on your previous backup copy and make sure that you don't have a failed backup recovery as well. This inherently delivers a massive window of data loss as well. Now with Zerto, it doesn't have to be that. Because there's no dependency on snapshots, you simply roll back to the previous checkpoint where you're comfortable rolling back to. And that's what makes it so different. Not only that, but how simple and easy it is to simply designate the checkpoint that you want to recover those applications as well. So we've looked at Zerto's replication, we've looked at Zerto's journal recovery, but one of the most important pieces is how Zerto treats your enterprise applications cohesively. Because if you think of the nature of enterprise applications, they contain multiple VMs. Now, when you're simply creating a copy and then archiving this, it really isn't a problem. But if you think about recovery scenarios, especially like ransomware, being able to consistently recover those applications is a challenge when it comes to backup. And the reason I say that is because when you have a daily backup, multiple VMs are at different checkpoints, even if it's the same application. So when you have to recover, you have to find the common denominator, and that becomes a massive problem. And then when you scale that across multiple applications, now you're talking about days and weeks spent on recovering enterprise applications. Now with Zerto, that's completely different. The reason is we treat applications cohesively. So in what we would call a virtual protection group, you have the ability to simply designate all of the VMs respective to that application, and when the time comes that you need to recover them, you simply recover the entire application stack seamlessly. So instead of days and weeks recovering enterprise applications, you simply take quite a few minutes. So that is a massive differentiator. So now that we've looked at replication, we've looked at journal recovery, and we've looked at application consistency, let's take a look at solving for backup. Now, historically, disaster recovery and backup, as we've discussed, are completely siloed. But with Zerto, with its software-only approach, with its non-disruptive approach, it was easy for us to simply unlock our replication to multiple storage tiers. Now, what this means is that you have the ability to point that journal to secondary storage. That's much more cost-effective, and you can retain workloads for years. And now, not only are you protecting your mission critical applications, but you can also protect all of your applications and your workloads with Zerto across the short term and the long term, still getting the performance of Zerto, the simplicity of it, and being able to recover entire sites, entire applications, VMs, or files. And that's what's so critical about our ability to be able to simplify operations with Zerto. But on the point of simplifying, there's another very important point. And that is talking about our orchestration and our automation and the fact that Zerto is based on one interface and one experience. From the same user interface, you have simple management across on-premises and cloud for all of your workloads. Your orchestration and automation is seamless. You can migrate, you can fail back, you can fail over in just a few clicks. You can also automate your reporting and then automate the compliance reporting that you get as well. So a lot of organizations spend hours, or especially days on DR testing. With Zerto, that comes down to hours, and then you also get that validated automated reporting as well. And most importantly, you get full visibility and control with Zerto Analytics, being able to monitor your performance, your consumption, but also even be able to forecast future resources as well. And this really summarizes what the Zerto IT Resilience platform can do. Within the same platform, within one SKU, one piece of software with one interface, you can solve for disaster recovery, operational recovery, long-term retention, think backup, hybrid and multi-cloud or workload mobility, and engage with operational services as well. This is all on a foundation of continuous data protection with seamless orchestration and automation wrapped around complete visibility and analytics. And let's not forget that Zerto has strong strategic alliances with Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure, AWS, IBM Cloud, VMware, Microsoft Hyper-V, and HPE as well. And as a testament to what Zerto can do from a return on investment perspective, it's really about being able to reduce the time, the resources required to fulfill these operations. Now, these are the exact outcomes that organizations should look for when they're in their agile procurement process. Not just on speeds and feeds and specific capabilities, but what are we trying to accomplish? Are we trying to reduce the amount of people that are spending time on reactive operations? Are we trying to reduce the amount of tools? Are we trying to save money? Are we trying to reduce downtime and data loss? And with Zerto, you can do all of that. You have the example of HCA, who was able to replace multiple point solutions from 4 solutions to 1 and save over $10 million in both maintenance, license, and infrastructure costs. You have BJ's that was able to utilize the public cloud as a disaster recovery site and save over $800,000 within 3 years. And then you have organizations like Starbucks that were able to drastically decrease the time spent on production support processes. And then you have organizations like United that trust Zerto to make sure that it reduces unplanned and planned downtime. And they use Zerto to protect their website and their application that generates over $1 million an hour. And even the example of XPO Logistics, where things that usually cause planned downtime, with Zerto, they were able to merge over 21 data centers into 6 data centers within 36 months. Now, think about these outcomes, think about the capabilities that Zerto has, what you should expect out of your future organizations, and we ask you to visit our website to really consume what Zerto can do, but to always be proactive in thinking about how can I improve our future process of evaluating solutions, of evaluating tools, and what we can do to make sure that we can remain competitive today. So I want to thank you for your time, and we're going to make sure to answer all of your questions within the chat as well. Thank you so much.